So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Now we will come to the second part in the restoration period, which started with Charles II becoming the king in 1660, and it ended with his brother James II being headed. Okay, James II, yes, being beheaded or taken out of the throne. In 1688. We talked about John Dryden, as a key figure during the Restoration time, and we said that he was a supporter of the monarchy and Richard II. Okay, now he wrote a very actually influential satire, which is named Absalom and Ekitiful. Okay, now Absalom and Ekitiful is actually an allegory for the political situation during Dryden's time. Of course, Absalom and Ekitiful were against the king at that time, similar to those who the rebels against Richard II. So Dryden is criticizing them, okay, and writing this mock heroic poem. Okay, now let's come to the first question. What is the main theme of Absalom and Ekitiful? Of course, the central theme is temptation, okay, sin, fall, and punishment. Of course, the temptation will be actually practiced on Absalom, okay, by Ekitiful, okay, and then the sin will be the sin of getting rid of the king, okay. Sorry for that, just a minute. Okay, and the fall, of course, it's the fall of Absalom when he accepted to fight against David, and the punishment after that. The poem is predominantly a political satire. يبقى هي قصيدة سياسية ساخرة that explores the conflict between Catholics and Protestants. كتير حكينا عن الحروب اللي تسببها الانقسام في التيار الديني عندهم ما بين الكاثوليكيين والبروتستانت during the rule of King Charles II. We talked about this point, the political situation. There was a fight between those who were supporters of the monarchy and those who were against monarchy, and they were supporters of the Republican governments. It also shares many features with religious poetry due to its biblical allusions. Yes, this poem is full of biblical allusions, so it is similar to the religious poetry. It has features of the religious poetry. Now, the setting. Where does the whole story of this poem take place? The poem is set in King David's Israel. تعرفوا الملك داود اللي هو النبي داود اللي حكم إسرائيل. But it is meant to be a commentary on England in the 17th century. يبقى صحيح القصة هي قصة الملك داود أوكي مع الإسرائيليين، ولكن المقصود فيها أنها تكون رمز للصراع السياسي الموجود في إنجلترا في القرن ال17. Now the tone is predominantly serious, okay, and philosophical, as it explores gloomy aspects, bad aspects, sad aspects of human nature, such as hypocrisy, اللي هي النفاق, vengeance, and rebellion, والانتقام والثورة ضد الملوك. Now, protagonist and antagonist, you know the protagonist is the hero of the story, and the antagonist is the wicked or the evil person. Now, Ekitiful is the antagonist who acts against King David. Absalom is the protagonist. Ekitiful attempts to persuade him to usurp David, to get rid of David. In this poem, Ekitiful represents the first Earl of Shaftesbury, and Absalom represents King Charles' son. So in England in the 17th century, we have the Earl اللي هو أمير أو حاكم Shaftesbury, okay, شافتبري. الآن هذا الأمير كان بيقنع في ابن الملك تشارلز the second إنه يخلع أبوه من الحكم ويتولى الحكم. نفس الشيء اللي كان بيحصل في وقت الملك ديفيد. كان طبعا ابن الملك تشارلز هو ابن غير شرعي. نفس الشيء بالنسبة للملك ديفيد، كان له ابن غير شرعي اللي هو أبسلوم، وأكيتيفل كان كان بيحاول يقنع أبسلوم إنه هو له الحق في إنه إيش يصبح وريث الملك ديفيد، لأنه كان شخصية هاندسم وسترونج. فكان بيقنعوا إنه يحارب الملك ديفيد ويخلعه من الحكم رغم إنه أبوه ويتولى هو الحكم. So the story of King David, Absalom and Ekitiful is similar to the story of Earl of Shaftesbury and King Charles' son and Charles II, King Charles II. Now the main conflict comes from Ekitiful tempting Absalom to overthrow David. Ekitiful claims that King David is weak in his old age, that Absalom would be a mighty ruler, and that even David would be happy to see Absalom on the throne. Yes, because David actually loved Absalom a lot, though Absalom was his illegitimate son, but he was a strong, courageous, handsome, so he was looking at him growing up and he loved him so much. So from this angle, Ekitiful tried to convince Absalom that David will not be upset because Absalom took over the throne. Now the climax اللي هي نقطة العقدة القوية في القصة. The climax of the poem marks a shift in Absalom's resolve. As a result of Akitiful's persuasive speeches، يعني ضلوا يحكي معاه ويقنعه، Absalom stops defending David. Absalom becomes angry at his parents for conceiving him outside marriage. يعني من كتر ما أكتفل أقنعه وضلوا يزن على راسه، اقتنع في النهاية، وبالعكس أصبح يعني غضبان لأنه أبوه وأمه أنجبوه بالحرام خارج مؤسسة الزواج. As an illegitimate child، يعني طفل غير شرعي، he cannot be heir، لا يمكن أن يكون وريث to the throne للعرش. Absalom considers this a great injustice and is strongly tempted to turn against David. يبقى أقنعه إنه إذا في عدم عدالة، ظلم أو لا عدالة، فهو كان الظلم في إنهم ينجبوا شخصية رائعة مثل أبسلوم كابن غير شرعي، لدرجة إنه أصبح لا يحق له إنه يتولى الحكم. فعشان هيك لازم يعاقب ديفيد، لازم يعاقب أبوه وياخد هو الحكم بالغصب من أبوه. Now why did Dryden write Absalom and Ekitiful؟ طبعا ليش راح كتب هذه القصة، عن هذه القصة كتبها في مسرحيته Absalom and Ekitiful. Absalom and Ekitiful is a biblical allegory. طبعا هي رمز ديني أو فيها رمزية دينية. The poem was written as an indirect applicative satire that is inviting the reader to draw parallels between the purely biblical story and contemporary politics. إذن هو الكاتب درايدن حاول إنه يتركها للقارئ إنه يستنتج التشابه ما بين القصة الدينية لأبسلوم and إكيتيفل وما بين الوضع الحالي في ذلك الوقت في بريطانيا. طيب the story is parallel to David king of Jews. طبعا الملك ديفيد كان ملك اليهود. His story was parallel to what was happening during Charles II time. Dryden criticized Absalom and his supporter to the crown, Ekitiful. Ekitiful seduces Absalom, who cannot withstand the temptation to try for the crown. إذا أنا عندي درايدن بينتقد أبسلوم، وبينتقد لأنه كان ابن ديفيد، وبينتقد اللي كانوا بدعموه وبيشجعوه على إنه يتولى الحكم، يعني ياخد الحكم من أبوه بالإجبار. أوكي. طبعا أبسلوم ما كانش قادر يعني يصمد أمام الإغراءات اللي إكتيفل كان بمارسها عليه. Dryden, on the other hand, satirizes the leading Whigs. This is the party that was against Charles II and was trying to remove Charles II from the throne as untrustworthy rebels. اعتبرهم انهم ثوار يعني بلا ثقة، لا يمكن الوثوق بهم. Unprincipled، بلا مبادئ. And unpatriotic، وبلا وطنية. Similar to Ekitiful, who revolted against King David when he became weak. Okay. طيب, what does Absalom represent? Of course, Absalom كابن غير شرعي للملك ديفيد would metaphorically represents Charles II illegitimate son James Scott. Okay. Who rebelled against Charles and the throne in Dryden's time. طبعا احنا في عندنا إذا بتتذكروا Charles II and then we had James the first. The James was in 1685 and then William III came and removed James from the throne. Okay. Fine. Let's come now to the last point in which we will talk about the allusions. Because I don't want to give you too much details about this poem. Okay, what you need to understand is the story of the poem, how it is compared to the situation in England. Okay, now the allusions, the poem is filled with biblical allusions. The allusions are references to the past. The story of Absalom and Ekitiful is inspired by the account in Samuel, influencing the events and themes of the poem. إذن هي مأخوذة من أحد كتب التوراة اللي مكتوبة عند اليهود وفيها قصة Absalom and Ekitiful. Okay, the main characters also share names with biblical characters. يبقى حتى في القصيدة تبعتنا الشخصيات الموجودة أسماءهم مشابهة لأسماء شخصيات موجودة في البايبل الفيرست بايبل اللي هو التوراة such as في الإنجيل اللي هو كان بيحكي القصص such as Korah who rebelled against Moses and Barzillai who assisted King David. There are allusions to Pharaoh الفرعون مصر, Egypt, Jonah or Jonas. Okay, we have Saul, Bathsheba, Moses, Agag, Samuel, Jacob اللي هو يعقوب, Esau, Adam, Noah, Samson, and many more. So there are many allusions to the past, and when you read the poem is like a story. It's telling you a story. This story is taken from the Bible. It is about King David. When he became weak, some of his actually companions wanted to take the throne from him. In order to find a king that the people would accept, they went to talk to Absalom. Absalom is the illegitimate son of David. They kept talking to him, especially Ekitiful, kept talking to him and convincing him that it is his right to be the king because King David became weak. At the end, Absalom was convinced, okay, to be against King David and to become the king, but later he will be punished for this and will be removed from the throne. Similar to that is the story of Charles II. Charles II was the king, but during his time, people were against the idea of monarchy. Some people were against the idea of monarchy, other people were supporters of it. Those who were against him, okay, tried to convince his son James to be against him and to take over the throne. Okay, now James is again similar to Absalom, is the illegitimate son of Richard II. So he took over the throne with the support of the rivals or competitors of his father, but later in 1685 he was actually removed from the throne. Okay, so that's the whole story. Thank you very much.